Ethan Cole had always believed that waking up early would somehow make him a better person. But that morning, when the alarm went off at 5:47, all he felt was the same old mix of nausea and failure. He lay there, staring at the stained ceiling of his cheap apartment in Dayton, Ohio, and realized something inside him was collapsing again. It felt like his entire life had been built on a stack of intentions that never led anywhere, like a building held together by mortar made of good promises that never hardened. And in that suffocating silence, before he even put his feet on the floor, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. If I disappeared today, would anyone notice? It wasn't drama. It was a brutal inventory of his own existence. He got up, walked to the bathroom, flipped on the flickering fluorescent light that always took a second to steady, and faced the mirror. The reflection staring back at him wasn't that of a young adult with potential or someone who still had time to turn everything around. There were deep eye bags, a worn-out expression, skin tinted by too many bad nights. But what bothered Ethan most wasn't any of that. It was the look in his eyes, as if they already knew he would fail that day, just like he had the days before. He leaned against the sink and stayed there, studying himself the way you'd study a stranger you don't particularly like. It was almost cruel to admit that the problem wasn't the world, wasn't the job, wasn't the circumstances. It was him, and deep down, he was afraid of that truth. The drive to work was usually automatic. Get in the old car, tune in to whatever station came up, and head to the warehouse where he hauled boxes and logged inventory for a supervisor who barely remembered his name. But that morning, something shifted. Maybe it was the weight of all those accumulated years. Maybe it was the realization that he was getting older without having ever started to actually live. Maybe he had simply hit his saturation point. He turned on the car, buckled his seatbelt, and let the engine cough its way awake. The city was still half asleep, that bluish Midwestern light that makes everything look a little sad before the sun really comes up. He drove for a few minutes with an empty mind until a paused podcast episode resumed on its own. It was David Goggins. His sharp, forceful voice punched through the speakers. And then came the line. That line. You treat yourself like glass and then complain when you can't handle pressure. Ethan wasn't expecting to feel anything, but he did. It was like someone had stripped away an invisible layer of protection he'd built around his own fragility. He pulled over without even realizing he was doing it. He sat there, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. It was just a sentence, just words. But it felt like a direct accusation. Like someone had watched every silent sabotage, every comfortable choice, every quick escape, and was now spitting the truth right into his face. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the sentence kept echoing. You treat yourself like glass. He knew exactly what that meant, and he hated admitting it. He had always avoided discomfort, always stepped back whenever life asked for courage, always chose the soft path even when it cost him dignity. It was as if he had trained his body and mind to retreat, to quit, to seek emotional room temperature. And that sentence pierced straight through all of it. When he finally pulled back onto the road, his heart was still racing, not with inspiration, but with shame. The kind of shame that comes from feeling exposed without having said a single word. The shame of being seen. The day at the warehouse went by like a gray smear. The air always smelled of dust and industrial paint. The carts rattled constantly, and people repeated the same script as always. Complaints about the boss, harmless gossip, the eternal countdown to the end of the shift. It was the perfect environment to operate on autopilot, and that's exactly how Ethan had been living for years. Marcus, his best friend, showed up during the break. Former military, strong build, alert eyes, a posture that held on to discipline even on the days he wrestled with the ghosts that he brought back from service. He was the kind of man who carried invisible scars but never let them dictate the direction of the day. He looked at Ethan and asked the same question he always did. Did you actually sleep or just pretend again? Ethan tried to laugh, but it barely came out. I'm fine, just tired. Marcus shook his head, unconvinced. Man, you say that all the time, but it's not tiredness. You're avoiding your own life. And if you don't take control of your mind, the world will do it for you. Ethan stayed quiet. Goggins' line was still burning in the back of his mind. He knew Marcus was right, but knowing was never the issue. It was doing something about it. He always found himself stuck in that toxic space between awareness and paralysis, a place where he could clearly see what needed to be done, but couldn't make himself move. The shift ended later than it should have, and when he realized the promotion had gone to someone else, someone less competent but far bolder, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked quickly towards the parking lot, chest tight, throat burning, swallowed by a mix of anger and shame he couldn't contain. And there, in the muffled silence between cars warmed by the sun, he broke. Not in tears, but in frustration. The kind of frustration that hurts physically, like something inside him was tearing open. And right then, like a verdict, the sentence came back. You treat yourself like glass. He leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing unevenly, feeling the world collapsing on top of him, not because he was too heavy, but because he was too weak to carry it the way he'd been carrying it. He stayed that way for long minutes, until something inside him snapped. Not motivation, not hope, a kind of desperation that finally got tired of itself. And that night, for the first time, he made a small decision, almost insignificant, but absolutely definitive. When he stepped into the bathroom, instead of turning the hot water on, he turned the cold tap. The freezing blast hit his skin like an electric shock, knocking the air out of his lungs, tightening every muscle, triggering instinctive alarms inside him. He almost jumped out, almost shut everything off, almost gave up the way he always did. But he didn't, because in that instant, he understood something brutal. It wasn't the water that hurt. It was facing the fact that he had built his own fragility. And there, shaking, breathing in quick, broken breaths, his whole body fighting the sensation, Ethan realized that if he didn't change now, he was done. Not later, now. In the chapters ahead, life is still going to test every inch of this decision. But that night, in the cold, in the discomfort, in the truth finally faced, Ethan began.
Waking up the next morning didn't feel cinematic at all. There was no epiphany, no new energy, no divine spark of motivation slipping through the window. Ethan opened his eyes and felt the same old heaviness, maybe even heavier now because he no longer had an excuse. He had made a choice, small and almost ridiculous, but real. And real choices demand a price. His whole body ached, not from the cold shower, but from the anxiety that took over afterwards. He barely slept, turning side to side, trapped in a question that hit like a blade. Am I actually going to change, or was last night just another impulse I'll abandon? It was a cruel question. Cruel because it usually had the same answer. He stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, took a slow breath, and put his feet on the floor. The first firm gesture of the day. Small, but for the first time in years, he wasn't getting up out of obligation. He was getting up against something. Against the fragile man he'd spent years training inside himself. It was still dark. The street light seeped through the blinds, casting shadows that made the room look almost like a basement. He walked to the kitchen, opened the nearly empty fridge, and grabbed the water bottle. He drank half of it in one go, as if trying to force his body awake. When he checked the clock on the wall, 4:59 a.m., a pinch of doubt hit him. But the doubt came with something else, a different kind of friction, as if the cold shower had cracked a shell, revealing a part of him he had never used. He put on his workout clothes, not because he wanted to, but because he hated the idea of staying who he was. Loathing his own passivity was finally becoming fuel. Outside, the air cut like a blade. Late fall in the Midwest had a cruel habit of reminding everyone that the world didn't care about their comfort. He started running without warming up, feeling every muscle complain. His body was heavy, slow, awkward. His breathing failed too quickly for someone his age, but he kept going. He passed the empty park, the old houses that always smelled like firewood when the temperature dropped, the auto shop that wouldn't open until 7. Everything was quiet, except for the thoughts screaming inside him. After a while, the childish part of him, the one that always won, started bargaining. Doesn't have to be much today. One lap around the block is enough. You barely slept. No need to push. He knew that voice well. It was the same one that guided him for years. A soft, logical, seemingly protective voice that had killed his momentum every single time. But this time, Ethan did something different. He didn't answer. He didn't argue. He didn't try to win the dialogue. He just kept running. That single act, ignoring his own internal narrative, was more discipline than anything he had done in the last 3 years. After 25 painful minutes, he got back home with the strange sensation, not pride, resistance. And resistance was new territory. Work, on the other hand, felt like a different battlefield. The warehouse seemed louder than usual, as if every box, every forklift, every pointless argument existed to test his mood. And it was testing him, because now he was more aware of his own mind, more sensitive to what he used to overlook. Marcus found him early in the morning, wearing that look that always seemed to see more than Ethan said. "You look like you fought your own brain this morning," he said. Ethan gave him a tired half smile. "I don't know if I won, but I showed up." Marcus nodded, as if that response was everything he needed to hear. "That's already more than yesterday." The line hit deep, because for the first time, it was true. But the world wasn't interested in his progress. Before noon, the warehouse manager, the same one who'd handed the promotion to someone else, called Ethan over to fix pallets that had already been fixed hours earlier by someone too afraid to be blamed for mistakes. It was typical. Whenever something went wrong, it landed on Ethan, because he never argued, never confronted, never set boundaries. But with his body tired and his mind exposed, it hit differently. The manager explained everything as if Ethan were stupid, as if he didn't understand the job he'd been doing for years. He spoke in that condescending, pseudo-paternal tone that always made Ethan shrink. But this time, without planning it, he froze. Not physically, internally. A heavy silence formed between them, and Ethan felt that old impulse rising. The impulse to apologize for something he didn't do, to take the blame, to avoid conflict just to keep the peace. But that posture had never brought peace, not once. So he took a breath, a long, deliberate one, strong enough that the manager noticed, and he answered slowly, "I organized that section this morning. If someone messed it up after that, it wasn't me." No aggression, no challenge, just clarity. The manager raised an eyebrow, surprised. He wasn't used to Ethan setting boundaries. He didn't know how to respond. And like a lot of men with no real authority, He backed off the moment someone showed firmness. "Well, then review it, that's all." And he walked away. Ethan stayed there feeling his heartbeat pounding, not from fear, but from survival, from resisting an automatic behavior that had defined his whole life. Marcus appeared minutes later. "I saw it," he said, placing a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That is the beginning." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. When he went home that night, every part of his body hurt. The run, the work, the emotional weight, everything stacked up, but something in the air felt different. Something quiet, hard to name, but undeniable. The world hadn't gotten smaller. He had gotten bigger, just a bit. And for someone who spent decades treating himself like glass, that tiny bit felt like a revolution. He took another cold shower, this time not as an act of desperation, but as a physical reminder that discomfort was the new floor. The freezing water hit him, cut him, burned him, but now there was purpose, there was intention, there was direction. And for the first time, as the water ran down and his body shook, Ethan thought, if I keep going, maybe I actually can become someone capable. That possibility, small, vague, fragile, is what kept him standing that night. And deep down, he knew. The real test hadn't even started yet.
The third month of Ethan Cole's new routine began without ceremony, the same way everything else in his life usually did. He hadn't marked it on a calendar, hadn't planned milestones, hadn't made promises to himself. He just kept going, one day after another, stumbling, irritated, exhausted, but consistent. Consistency felt strange, almost unsettling. A man who had always quit the moment things started to burn was now moving through dozens of days burning non-stop. His pre-dawn workouts had become less chaotic, not easier, never easier, just less chaotic. The runs still set his chest on fire. The push-ups still felt like they were tearing out some old part of him, and the freezing morning showers still punched the breath out of his lungs. But all of it felt familiar now. Pain had become a loud neighbor, annoying but predictable. That raw, unglamorous discipline was slowly becoming part of who he was. And for someone who had spent a lifetime running from himself, that was the beginning of a full internal rewiring. Even so, as much as he was changing, the world around him hadn't grown any kinder. Work stayed the same, the warehouse stayed gray, his coworkers kept complaining while doing the bare minimum. The manager kept delegating tasks like a man throwing darts blindfolded. Nothing changed, but Ethan was changing inside that same scenery, and that made everything look different. It was an especially heavy Tuesday, one of those days when the air feels thicker, people seem more irritated, and anything has the potential to turn into a problem. Ethan woke at 4:30, ran for 40 minutes, took the cold shower, and arrived at work with every muscle pulsing. Not from weakness, but from pushing his limits day after day. Marcus was leaning near the entrance, drinking coffee and watching people walk in. The former military guy always looked like someone who had seen too much and didn't get surprised by anything anymore. "You're steadier," he said, blunt as always. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Steadier how?" "Your posture's different. You're breathing too. When we change on the inside, the body gives us away. You don't notice it, but I do." Ethan didn't respond. He never knew what to do with recognition, but he didn't shy away from it either. The shift started like any other. Boxes being moved, forklifts guided by operators who looked like they wanted to sleep at the wheel, metal clattering in the distance, dust hanging in the air. But around 10 in the morning, the trigger that would define the rest of the day happened.
Ethan was lining up a row of pallets when he heard the manager yell his name. Not call, yell. That passive-aggressive tone that always made him shrink on the inside. "Ethan, over here, now!" He took a deep breath, the long breath he'd learned to use as an anchor, and walked over. The manager stood there holding a clipboard, wearing an irritated expression, looking ready to unload whatever frustration he'd accumulated. "These reports," he snapped, shaking the papers, "they're incomplete. You turned this in yesterday?" Ethan looked at the pages. They were reports he knew he had filled out, carefully, not perfectly, but thoroughly. He felt the old impulse climb up his spine. Apologize on reflex, take the blame, accept the humiliation like it was his natural position in the world. But now, inside him, there was something new. A space between stimulus and response. A small interval carved out by all those mornings of voluntary discomfort. And he stepped into that interval. He breathed. Again. Again. The manager's frustration wasn't about Ethan. It was about the manager. Other people's incompetence wasn't his responsibility. Ethan understood that now. "I filled out those reports yesterday, and they were complete. If someone changed something after I did them, it wasn't me." The manager stared at him, waiting for the retreat that always followed. But it didn't come. The air shifted. "You're implying I made a mistake?" he asked, recognizing the trap instantly. Before, he would have walked straight into it. But now, he saw it for exactly what it was. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. I did my job. If there were changes after that, then everyone involved needs to go over it again." A worker nearby paused mid-task. Marcus, watching from a distance, straightened his back. Something was happening. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His authority had always come from habit, not competence. And now that Ethan wasn't folding, the entire dynamic collapsed. He simply turned around and walked away, irritated by the sudden realization that he had no control over someone he had always treated like a pushover. When Ethan returned to his section, he felt his heart pounding. But it wasn't fear, it was strength. A rough, primal strength, the strength of someone who finally understood he didn't have to live like fragile glass. Marcus walked up to him. That, he said with a half smile. "That is what I've been waiting to see since the day you started walking around here like you were already defeated." Ethan let out a short, relieved laugh. "I'm just tired of being the guy who keeps his head down." Marcus nodded. "Changing hurts, but staying the same hurts more." The rest of the shift went fast. Ethan worked with almost a military focus, not because he felt above anyone, but because he finally felt aligned with himself. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an imposter inside his own body. When he got home, completely drained, he opened the door and caught sight of the hallway mirror. And for the first time, he looked at himself without looking away. There was something different there. Not beauty, not dramatic lighting, not some cinematic transformation. A quiet firmness, a clarity in his eyes. The expression of someone who is carrying real weight and had finally learned to hold it. He ran a hand over his face, took a slow breath, and a thought rose from somewhere deeper than language itself. Life never tried to break me. I'm the one who treated myself like I was fragile. And today, I stopped doing that. The thought echoed inside him. Not poetic, not romanticized. It echoed like a new rule for existing. That night, before sleeping, Ethan sat at the edge of the bed and stayed there, breathing. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't ritual. It was presence, something he had never allowed himself before. And as his breath slowed, as his mind stopped fighting him, something formed inside that quiet. Life wasn't going to get easier. He was going to get stronger. In the days ahead and in the years ahead, if he kept going, there would be more pain, more exhaustion, more challenges. But none of that scared him anymore. Because now he understood that pain wasn't the enemy. It was proof. It was a tool. It was the path. And in that deep calm that only comes after confronting yourself, Ethan finally understood. He didn't need motivation. He needed discipline. And discipline, he was building it. The story ends here, but his life was only beginning. And the message it leaves behind isn't soft or comfortable or designed to make anyone feel good. You can keep hiding behind comfort, or you can start building yourself. The choice is yours.